Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofoutlander.com. For all things Outlander, from the Diana Gabaldon book series to the Starz TV series and everything in between. This is podcast episode 128, week 14 of the Drums of Autumn read-along. This week's podcast is entitled Rattled. We are covering chapters 24 and 25. Let's begin. And the summary goes something like this. Roger is baffled. He assures himself all is well. Deep down, he knows something is amiss. Just maybe, though, he stopped Brianna from looking back. On the ridge, a rattlesnake takes up residence in the privy. There's also a guest with measles taking up space in the corncrib. Claire searches for grins and peace of mind. A boy and a stepfather unexpectedly arrive. Claire's emotions and thoughts go wild. It's Lord John and Master William. William recently inherited lands in Virginia. A crappy mishap in the privy leads to much mirth and wounded pride. Young Ian doesn't get off cleanly either. Inside the chapters. Chapter 24, Letter Writing, The Great Art o' Love. Oxford, March 1971. It's been 6 months since we've seen Roger. With Brianna in the United States, the rainy weather of Oxford seems cold and dreary to him. He's heading to the office to see if there are any letters. Among the letters, there's one from the States. Roger involuntarily grins. The clerk asks if Roger will be seeing his young woman soon. Roger hopes to see her in the summer. They are planning on visiting in July. But that is 4 months away. Roger might die from the ache of wanting her. Brianna wrote to Roger every few days, though the tone has changed. They are no longer passion-filled. He thinks she is holding back in her letters somehow, that something seems off and different. Perhaps it was natural, a normal progression as they knew each other longer. No one could go on writing passionate missives day after day, not with any honesty. No doubt it was only his imagination that Brianna seemed to hold back a bit in her letters. He could do without the excesses of one friend's girl who had clipped bits of her pubic hair and included them in a letter. Though he rather admired the sentiment behind the gesture. So it sounds to me like Roger is ignoring his instincts. He's trying to talk himself out of acknowledging what's missing. Roger absentmindedly eats his sandwich and thinks about the interest Fiona is taking in his love affair with Brianna. She sends him clippings from women's magazines detailing the ways a woman should be acting. I mean, just think about all the ridiculous Cosmopolitan or Name Your Woman's Magazine articles that you've seen. Roger doubts Brianna is reading the equivalent magazines in America. She's not a game player. She isn't playing games, right? Did she, though? With a qualm of uneasiness, Roger recalled another of my weekly's tips to the lovelorn. Don't assume he can read your mind. Give him a hint of how you feel. Roger took a random bite of the sandwich and chewed, oblivious to its contents. Well, he'd hinted all right. Come out and bared his bloody soul, and she'd promptly leapt into a plane and buggered off to Boston. Funnily, though, he believes he's deflected Brianna from the past. But he's now downright obsessed with it. Claire and that bloody Highlander of hers obsessed him. They might as well have been his own family for the fascination they held. Always be honest, tip number 3. If he'd helped her to find out everything, perhaps the ghost of Jamie Fraser would be laid now. And so would Roger. Oh, bugger, he muttered to himself. This chapter brings more question with only Roger's point of view being seen. We haven't heard from Brianna for more than a year, since she visited over that fateful Christmas when Roger proposed. What has she been up to besides finishing her studies? Has Roger found information? This chapter succeeds in building tension, sowing doubt, and creating worry in Roger and the reader. Because we have no idea what Brianna's doing. It startled me when I was going through to write the notes, and it had been, how many months? It's March, so 15 months since we've seen or heard from Brianna at all. That's a long time. Chapter 25, Enter a Serpent. Fraser's Ridge, October, 1768. Just to start off this chapter, it has been a little over 4 years since Jamie had left Hellwater. He left in 1764 when William was 6 years old and change. So that's just a little seed to plant as we start this. If there's one thing Claire doesn't like, it's a rattlesnake preventing her from using the privy. In fact, it's sitting on the privy seat rattling away. She spends a decent amount of time trying to figure out what to do without riling the snake to attack her. Jamie comes along and wants to know what she's doing. Claire, what the hell are you doing? I jumped at the sound, and so did the snake, or at least it moved, suddenly flexing its coils in what happened to be imminent attack. I froze to the doorframe and the snake quit moving, except for the chronic whir of its rattles, like the annoying buzz of an alarm clock that wouldn't shut off. There's a fucking snake in here, I said through my teeth, trying not to move even my lips. Well, why are you standing there? Move aside and I'll pitch it out. I could hear Jamie's footsteps coming close. The snake heard him too. Obviously, it wasn't deaf and revved up its rattling. Jamie hits the snake with a rock and knocks it into the privy. Claire says it sounds like a hollow thwack. What a great word, thwack. I would be terrified to use the privy even if the snake couldn't jump that high. Would all the human waste kill it? Instead of hanging around, Claire runs into the woods to empty her bladder. She returns to find young Ian and Jamie peering into the privy hole with a torch in hand. Can they swim? Ian was asking, trying to see past Jamie's head without setting his uncle's hair on fire. I dinna ken. I think maybe so. What I want to know is, can they jump? Ian jerked back, then laughed a little nervously, not altogether sure that Jamie was joking. Young Ian and Jamie accidentally clang heads, leaving both greatly pained. Jamie is annoyed Claire doesn't comfort him. Is it still alive? I asked anxiously, peering toward the privy. Jamie opened one eye and regarded me under the clutching fingers. Oh, my head's fine, thanks. I expect my ears will have quit ringing by next week sometime. Now. It would take a sledgehammer to dent your skull. Let me look, though. I pushed his fingers aside and pulled his head down, feeling gently through the thick hair. You won't die, not from that anyway. Oh, good, he said dryly. I'd much rather die of a snake bite next time I sit down to do my business. Jamie clarifies the difference between poisonous and venomous to young Ian. Poisonous is if you eat it and become ill. Venomous is if it bites you and you become ill. There are links in the podcast notes that explain it further. They banter about how to get the great thing from the privy. No one wants to sit on the seat with that beastie down below. Claire's plan strikes. Young Ian as funny. We could invite all of the Hansons for dinner, serve beer, and drown him, I suggested facetiously, naming a nearby and very numerous Quaker family. Ian erupted in giggles. Jamie gave me an austere sort of look and turned toward the woods. The amount of time spent on the snake in the privy must mean it holds importance to some future event. Diana Gabaldon rarely puts things in and as a surprise, or when something seems sort of out of place, you know it's going to come up later and you need to pay attention. But when she spends a lot of time on something, that's also of importance. They have a hearty breakfast, no thanks to the white sow feistily commandeering the pantry. Jamie is reading his only book, Natural History of North Carolina, to brush up on rattlesnakes. Claire's more interested in how to deal with a rude pig. Jamie is still hungry, but the rest of the eggs are going to the ill Tuscarora in the corncrib. He'd been part of a hunting party, but became too ill and was brought back to her by his companions. Claire is sure he has the measles. Too bad Claire doesn't have extra vitamin A on hand. It's supposed to help with measles. Measles is highly contagious, so the man must stay segregated from everyone who hasn't had the disease before. The man is so ill he is barely able to eat or drink. Claire tries another tactic, appealing to the spiritual so the man might accept her aid. I held up the raven's feather amulet, turned my face skyward, and solemnly intoned the most sonorous thing I could remember, which happened to be Dr. Rawlings' receipt for the treatment of syphilis, rendered in Latin. I poured a small bit of lavender oil into my hand, dipped the feather in it, and anointed his temples and throat while singing "Blow the Man Down" in a low, sinister voice. It might help the headache. His eyes were following the feather's movements. I felt rather like a rattlesnake charming away in its coil, waiting for a squirrel to run down my throat. I picked up his hand, laid the oil-dabbled amulet across his palm, and closed his fingers round it. Then I took the jar of mentholated bear grease and painted mystic patterns on his chest, being careful to rub it in well with the balls of my thumbs. The reek cleared my sinuses. I could only hope it would help the patient's thick congestion. I completed my ritual by solemnly blessing the bottle of infusion with "In nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritu Sancti, Amen," and presenting it to my patient's lips. Looking mildly hypnotized, he opened his mouth and obediently drank the rest. So Claire said she felt like a snake oil salesman. Whatever works, Claire, whatever works. She not only doctored him, she helped him emotionally and maybe spiritually. Sometimes when treating someone, all that can be done is to make them feel well cared for and understood. Claire goes hunting for any edible or medicinal plants. She wades into the icy cold stream. The mere act of being alone in nature gives Claire a sense of peace, calm, and being grounded. She notices the abundance of life forms surrounding her down to the gnats. Everything moving, all of the time, down to the smallest molecule, but in its movement, giving the paradoxical impression of stillness, small local chaos giving way to the illusion of a greater order overall. I moved too, taking my part in the stream's bright dance, feeling light and shadow change across my shoulders, toes searching for footholds among the slippery, half-seen rocks. My hands and feet were numb from the water. I felt as though I were half made of wood, yet intensely alive, like the silver birch that glowed above me, or the willows that trailed wet leaves in the pool below. She allows herself to become part of the natural order. I wonder how she centered herself in Boston all those years as a doctor. Before she married Frank, she spent many years living rough and being outdoors, traveling with her uncle. It makes sense. She needs nature. And what I find fascinating is that I don't know if Claire connects that this is how she connects to God in all things, how she sees the creation, and that's how she is spiritually fed. I don't know. It seems like the woman can witness miracles, like her shoes and the ghost, and then she completely boxes them up or separates them out and tries to go back to her, quote, scientific training, but she herself has to go through the ritual and participate in the things of nature on a consistent basis, or she shrivels. She doesn't function as well. Because when she does that, or doesn't do it, rather, she ends up being pretty one-dimensional, like probably when she was in the hospital. She was focusing on one part of herself and not working with any other aspects. Those are my 25 cents. Her communion is broken by the sound of shriek and a voice from the bank above her. There's a familiar-looking, frantic boy in front of her. Slanted blue eyes stared at me from either side of a knife-bridged nose, familiar to me as the back of my own hand, though I knew I'd never seen this child before. My heart was somewhere in the vicinity of my tonsils, and the chill had shot up from my feet into the pit of my stomach. Trained to react in spite of the shock, I managed to take in the rest of his appearance, shirt and breeches of good quality, though splashed with water, and long pale shins blobbed with black clots like bits of mud. "Leeches," I said. Professional calm descending by habit over personal tumult. It couldn't be, I was telling myself. At the same time, I knew it damn well was. It's only leeches, they won't hurt you. The boy has leeches all over his legs, and he's mortified. Claire sits down to remove the many leeches. She wants him to tell her where he comes from. Claire was outwardly calm, but her hands are shaking, and her inner tumult is real, as she said. Asking after his stepfather, William wants to know how Claire knows him. He gives his full name to her. "Yes, it is," he said shortly instead. "William Viscount Ashness, 9th Earl of Ellesmere." He's also known as William Ransom. They head to the cabin so she can salt the rest of the leeches she couldn't remove. Claire realizes Lord John left William by the stream to go ahead and warn Jamie. I sense more than annoyance in Claire. Jealousy, perhaps? Claire is stunned to have William and Lord John surprise them with a visit. Maybe only the king would be less probable. Claire's thoughts and emotions are careening around her head. She's like a bomb with a hair trigger switch. What had possessed that? I groped about, trying to choose among several discreditable epithets to apply to Lord John Grey, and gave up the struggle in favor of trying to think what in heaven's name to do. I gave that up too. There wasn't a thing I could do. William Viscount Ashness, 9th Earl of Ellesmere, or he thought he was. And just what do you propose to do, I thought silently and savagely toward Lord John Grey, when he finds out that he's really the bastard son of a pardoned Scottish criminal? And more important, what's the Scottish criminal going to do or feel? Claire finally reveals why she dislikes Lord John. Alarming as I found the notion, I couldn't reconcile it with the man I'd met in Jamaica. I might have sound reasons for disliking John Grey. Always difficult to feel a warm sense of goodwill toward a man with a professed homosexual passion for one's husband, after all. But I had to admit that I'd seen no trace of either recklessness or cruelty in his character. On the contrary, he had struck me as a sensitive, kindly, and honorable man. Or at least he had, before I found out about his predilections toward Jamie. She is jealous. She wants to stop and stare at William. The idea of seeing the boy next to Jamie gives her a thrill of sorts. As she eyes William, she has an intense observation. Bree. It hit me with a small shock, like a spark of electricity. He didn't look quite a bit like Jamie, but it was my memories of Brianna that had caused that jolt of instant recognition when I saw him. Only 10 years her junior, the childish outlines of his face were much more similar to hers than to Jamie's. Poor Claire. This is a gut punch. The knowledge of his son is one thing, but to see him in the flesh is staggering. Claire doesn't even have the solace of having Brianna near. This also brings to roost the years they spent apart. Clear admission of life lived without her. Claire is a whirling tornado of internal feelings. She finds Jamie and Lord John sitting on the bench conversing. Greetings commence, and she takes William into the house for final leech removal. The poor boy trembles as she takes care of the left-behind wounds. "It's not that I'm afraid of blood," he said in a tone of bravado that made it apparent that was precisely what he was afraid of. "It's only They're such filthy creatures. Stiff upper lip and all. Claire also attends to his disheveled looks. Reluctantly, he relaxes under her too familiar ministrations. She feels a sudden sense of ownership over the boy. I had learned of his existence only a few years earlier, and if I had thought of him in the meantime at all, had felt no more than a minor sense of curiosity tinged with resentment. But now something, be it his resemblance to my own child, his resemblance to Jamie, or simply the fact that I had taken care of him in some small way, had given me a strange feeling of almost propriety concern for him. She can't help herself. Claire can be pretty closed off and seem cold, but when she loves hard. And how could she not have a maternal love for this boy and want to shelter him and take care of him? And she also has fresh annoyance at Lord John. Jamie enters seeking refreshment for their guests. Jamie looks calm, but he's strung tight. Claire gathers the necessities except for the butter because the white sow is holding it hostage in the pantry. "Pig," said William, looking confused. "In the pantry," I said with a nod at the closed door. "Why do you keep—" He then started, sat up sharply and closed his mouth, having obviously been kicked under the table by his stepfather, who was smiling pleasantly over his cup. Oh, William is almost 11 years old. This is October. His birthday is in 3 months. Lord John apologizes for the unexpected visit and hopes it's not too much of an inconvenience. Meanwhile, Claire mentally tallies the sleeping arrangements. "Not at all," I said, wondering just where we were going to put them to sleep. William could go to the shed with Ian, I supposed. It was no worse than sleeping rough, as he had been doing. But the thought of sharing a bed with Jamie, with Lord John on the trundle and an arm's length away. Can you feel the tension in the air? My goodness, they need a full bottle of brandy and maybe some marijuana to relax. Where's the good Father Fogden when you need him? Maybe some of that good sangria, too. This is a powder keg ready to go off. Young Ian comes in like a bull in a china shop. Claire sends him to show William around the property with snacks in hand. This is obviously a ploy to get the three of them alone. Then, free of their inhibiting presences, I filled the cups with brandy, sat down again, and fixed John Gray with a narrow eye. "What are you doing here?" I said without preamble. He opened his light blue eyes very wide, then lowered his long lashes and batted them deliberately at me. Cheeky fellow. "I did not come with the intentions of seducing your husband, I assure you." "John!" Jamie's fist struck the table with a force that rattled the teacups. His cheekbones were flushed dark red, and he was scowling with embarrassed fury. "Sorry." Gray, by contrast, had gone white, though he remained otherwise visibly unruffled. It occurred to me for the first time that he might possibly be as unnerved as Jamie by this meeting. "My apologies, Mum," he said with a curt nod in my direction. "That was unforgivable. I would point out, however, that you have been looking at me since we met as though you had encountered me lying in the gutter outside some notorious molly house." A light flush burned over his face now, too. "Sorry," I breathed. "Give me a bit more notice next time and I'll take care to adjust my features." A molly house is a place for gay men to go and congregate and meet up and hook up. What do you get with a cheeky Englishman, an angry Scot, and an emotionally charged wife? I'd say a terrifically awkward time. Oh, to be a fly on the wall. John gets to the point at hand. His wife died aboard ship on the way to Jamaica. Poor Willie had been traveling with her. Claire reminds us that Lady Geneva was Isabel's sister and the biological mother of William. Lord John married Isabel to raise William together. Clare apologizes to John for more than the death of his wife. His appointment as the Jamaican governor was coming to an end, so settling his family there seemed a good idea. With her death and William's grief, coming to the colonies to distract him was in order, after John learned William now owns land in Virginia. John catches Clare thinking Fraser's Ridge is an out-of-the-way destination. Glass-faced Clare strikes again, and she doesn't like it at all that a stranger could read her mind just like Jamie. The subject of William arises. John had told him Jamie is an old soldiering acquaintance. Certainly William would recognize the groom Mac he had loved so much. But Jamie doesn't think William will connect the groom with him. Different time, different place, different continent. And then Clare suddenly inquires how John's wife died. He calls it the bloody flux, which is dysentery. There's a link in the show notes about dysentery and how it's treated. Clare wonders if that's where William saw leeches used. His reaction to having them on his body was quite severe. They are interrupted by young Ian standing in the doorway. There is a situation. "No, I thank you, Auntie. It's only—" He cast a helpless glance at Jamie. "Well, I'm sorry, Uncle. I shouldn't have let him do it, but—" "What?" Alarmed by Ian's tone of voice, Jamie was already on his feet. "What have you done?" The lad twisted his big hands together, cracking his knuckles in embarrassment. "Well, you see, his lordship asked for the privy, and so I told him about the snake, that he'd best go into the woods instead. So he did, but then he wanted to see the snake, and... He's not bitten?" Jamie asked anxiously. Lord John, who had obviously been about to ask the same thing, gave him a glance. "Oh, no." Ian looked surprised. "We could not see it to start with, but it was too dark below, so we lifted off the bench top to get more light. We could see the serpent fine. Then, and we poked at it with the bit, a long branch, so it was lashing to and fro like the wee book said, but it didn't seem inclined to bite itself. And... He darted a glance at Lord John and swallowed audibly. "It was my fault," he said, nobly squaring his shoulders, the better to accept blame. "I said as how I'd thought to shoot it earlier, but we did not want to waste the powder, and so his lordship said as how he could fetch his papa's pistol from the saddlebag and deal with the thing at once. And so... Ian... Stop leathering this instant and tell me straight what you've done with the lad. You've not shot him by mistake, I hope." Ian looked offended at the slur upon his marksmanship. "Of course not." Lord John coughed politely, forestalling further recriminations. "Perhaps you would be good enough to tell me the whereabouts of my son at this moment." Ian took a deep breath and visibly commended his soul to God. "He's in the bottom of the privy. Have you got a wee bit of rope, Uncle Jamie?" Holy wow. This scene kills me every time I read it. Thankfully, the privy isn't empty or full. If it was empty, he would have really hurt himself. If it was full, well, ugh. It's so disturbing and gross nonetheless. Jamie and Lord John go swiftly to the privy, with young Ian and Clare not far behind. Apparently the snake is no longer in the privy. "He says he's not hurt," Jamie assured me, turning away from the hole and unlimbering a coil of rope from his shoulders. "Good. Where's the snake, though?" "It went that way," Ian said, gesturing vaguely down the path by which I had come. "The laddie couldn't quite get a clear shot, so I gave the thing a wee snoove with the stick, and damned if the bugger didn't turn and come at me, right up the branch. It scared me so I let out a skellock and let go, and I bumped the lad, and well, that's how it happened." Trying to avoid Jamie's eye, he sidled toward the pit, and leaning over yelled awkwardly, "Hey, I'm glad you didn't break your neck." Young Ian is always good, He's a good character. He foils everything. William is unhurt except for his pride. He had fallen face first into the sewage. Lord John takes the first stab at William. What news from the underworld, Persephone? A pair of slanted eyes looked blue murder out of the mask of filth obscuring his lordship's features. It was a thoroughly Fraser expression. And I felt a qualm go through me at the sight. By my side, Ian gave a sudden start. He glanced quickly from the Earl to Jamie and back. Then he caught my eye and his own face went perfectly and unnaturally blank. The jig is up. Young Ian knows exactly who fathered that boy. Jamie takes his turn adding fuel to John's earlier remarks. Epicharmus at the Oracle of Delphi. Seekers after enlightenment would throw down a dead python into the pit and then hang about, breathing in the fumes as it decayed. Lord John declaimed, gesturing grandly, the spirit toward the heavens, the body to the earth. William exhaled strongly through his nose, precisely as Jamie did when tried beyond bearing. Ian twitched beside me. Good grief, I thought, freshly unnerved. Does the boy have nothing from his mother? And you have attained any spiritual insights as a result of your recent mythical experience, William? And everybody is laughing. Then Claire sees the Fraser rage about to come forth from William. She deftly corrects the situation with soap and direction given to water. With William off to wash, the question of the gun's whereabouts come up. With quick judgment passed, young Ian is sent naked to retrieve it from the bog of eternal stench. Take your clothes off first, I said helpfully. We don't want to have to burn them, do we? Okay. So a question came up in the Dram of Outlander group about William not recognizing Jamie. He was just past 6 years old when Jamie left Hellwater, but he and Jamie had spent a lot of time together. And when Jamie left, he had given him that crucifix. So in 4.5 years-ish, somewhere in there, sometimes it's hard to put exact timelines together. I might be able to if I went through all my show notes from doing the other read-alongs. I just didn't have time to do that here. But quickly I looked it up. William was born in January, so he would have been somewhere over 6 years old when Jamie left. And now he's almost 11. It's about 2.5, 3 months-ish before his 11th birthday. So why doesn't he recognize Jamie? Is it the context that Diana wrote it in, meaning different continent, different time, he's prepubescent and self-absorbed, he's in grief for his mother. So losing Isabel, yes, would be terrible and very difficult because it's the only mother he's known. But how would all of that mask him recognizing James Fraser as Groom Mac? I think he would have recognized him, especially because Jamie comforted him when he could, when he was small, and it was terrifically difficult on him when Jamie left Hellwater. It was impactful on him. It wasn't as if he didn't care. He didn't want him to leave because he felt so close to him. So I'm chalking this up to plot device because with all the detail that we know and how close he was to Jamie, whether or not he shared the same name, he should have some clue that this man is recognizable, that he seems familiar, just like Claire had the shock of familiarity about it, him looking like Brianna when she was younger. What do you think about that? I find it one of those plot devices that we just kind of ignore. Like there's one coming up that is so frustrating to me, always, that I just shake my fist at because it's obviously just put there as a means to somewhere, obviously. And I'll remind you what it is when we get there. But it reminds me of the witch trial and Claire never telling Jamie that Leary was behind her being there. She totally would have told him. She would never have left out that piece of information. Regardless of her thinking she was just a young, stupid girl, well, she was an attempted murderess. So, total plot device. Like, Claire would have absolutely told him, even if she didn't want him to do anything about it. So, I'm chalking the same kind of plot device up to this action of William absolutely not recognizing Jamie, or him seeming familiar at all. The hilarity of this chapter does not offset the undercurrents and the gravity of the truth. It's also worth noting there's an Indian ill with measles on the property. What is Lord John's true aim in coming? How jealous is Claire of the life that came before she returned? What does young Ian think of his newfound cousin? Will William ever recognize him? Can Claire accept the boy? Can Claire get along with Lord John and become his friend? What is going through Jamie's mind? This chapter is told through Claire's point of view. We see continued story building and character development. Humor was used as an excellent avenue to diffuse the tension and awkwardness. The privy scenario also provided an escape for the snake. I do have an email to read to you before we get on to some other things. It's from Meredith of Everett, Washington. Thank you, Meredith. Dear Desiree, I very much like the next few passages of the book. I don't know if you've read all the books yet, but snakes always seem to turn up in the Outlander saga. Yes, Meredith, they do show up just like spiders and webs, but I've read all the books multiple times. There was one in Dragonfly and Amber, Drums of Autumn, and The Fiery Cross, and the show supplied its own snake in Season 3. I have to say that snakes creep me out. One of the creepiest things I've ever seen in the world are their attempts to eat. I saw one who ate a porcupine, and the needle stuck through the middle of the snake from the inside and killed the snake. A few weeks ago, I saw on YouTube a python wrapping itself around the body of a full-grown elephant. The snake won. So I have to say that I would never want to live anywhere that had rattlesnakes. At least they alert you to their presence. I'm not sure what snakes are supposed to symbolize in Outlander, but my guess is that they mean that no matter how settled Jamie and Claire become, they will always be in danger. Yeah, I think snakes represent danger, temptation, difficulties. I have to say that I love the passages in the various books that show Lord John Grey and William Ransom. You get a glimpse of John's parenting style when he kicks his son under the table. If you'll recall, William was a bit of a brat when he was 6 years old, so John Grey's task of driving that out of him was a real challenge. I can understand why Claire would be put out by the sudden presence in their house. I don't particularly like Claire's confrontation of John. In the show, I have no doubt it will be more polite between them. In the show, there was no heart-to-heart talk between the two during Season 3, so the TV show's version of John is coming to the cabin, not realizing that Claire is onto him. I really hope that they don't skip the encounter in the show. There's been no casting announcement as to who will play 12-year-old William. Well, he's almost 11, but whatever. They play with timelines just like Diana does. And she wonders if the young actor will play him when he grows up. After this passage, William won't be seen again for a couple of seasons. If they manage to cast a 14-year-old who hasn't gotten his growth spurt yet, he might look sufficiently old enough later on. And she says, I'm sure you've received the news that Season 5 has been approved. Well, Ron said there's going to be a Season 5, but there's been no official announcement. And she just hopes books 9 and 10 get published before the show reaches 2023 and 2024. Thank you, Meredith. And we're going to be doing a couple of giveaways coming up. I'm getting some jewelry sent to me by an Outlander peer and someone who's a fan who also creates inspired artwork is going to be sending a piece for us to give away. Be on the lookout for that. So what do you think of these exchanges? The privy scene just cracks me up to no end. And the fact that young Ian just does stuff that is so ridiculous. And he doesn't have the forethought to not get into trouble. I bet Jamie was like that when he was younger. It's always funny. The other kind of thing to think about is that Claire was trying so hard to keep her clinical distance from William and just looking him over and just examining him, as it were. But she's really not doing a good job of it. This is where she's unreliable. Like, she doesn't necessarily see herself as we, the readers, see her. She thinks she's doing one thing when she's totally doing another. And as clinical as she tries to stay, her emotions are often absolutely just out of control. And we did get to see that. She was in no way managing them well. And Lord John could read right through her. And we really don't know at all what Jamie's thinking. We see this only from Claire's perspective, only from what she's experiencing, just like we only saw Roger's point of view in the first chapter. And I'm glad Diana threw that in because we haven't seen Roger and Brianna in forever. And now we only see Roger and what he's up to. And it really highlights the challenges of not only having a long-distance relationship before all the tech that we have now, but that Roger can mislead himself and not be honest with himself about what he sees going on, that he's trying so hard to push it away when he knows better. It'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. So what's coming up? Next week we're doing the next 2 chapters. And so it'll be 26 and 27. And if you're wondering how can you participate, well, you can send your comments, questions, thoughts to contact@adramaofoutlander email. You can call and leave a message on the listener line at 719-425-9444. Go to the social media sites, the A Drama of Outlander page on Facebook, ask to join the A Drama of Outlander group on Facebook. You have to answer 3 questions. No bots or trolls are allowed. On Twitter and Instagram, it's Drama of Outlander without the A in front. And of course, the website is adramaofoutlander.com, and you can follow it as well. Remember, I do post my show notes to go with the podcast. They are not exact. It's basically my script, but I'm not in a position to be able to listen to my podcast after I record it and type the whole thing out as a transcript. I am not there yet. Speaking of transcripts, if there are any quotes or any parts of the podcast that you think others would want to hear, let me know where you're listening and I can clip them out and post them. The other way that you can support the podcast is go over to Apple Podcasts through iTunes and leave a review. It does help people find the show, and it helps me know what you think and if you like it or not. It helps if you share the podcast, tell people about it, share the blog post that I make that has the link to the podcast recording in it. Go and be active within the A Drama of Outlander community. It's a bunch of really nice, smart people. And happily for me, there's very little moderation that has to be done because you're all adults from all over the world, which is really fantastic. And I appreciate you so much. Unfortunately, I am not going to be doing the Wednesday night chats on Twitter until the show comes back. It has become too difficult with the other things in life that I have to manage outside the podcast. I wish I could just do podcasting, but that's not really how it works. But that will come back right before the show returns to air. The other way that you can support the podcast is through financial offering. You can go to patreon.com/adramaofoutlander and you can support the podcast with as little as $1 a month. And trust me, every dollar counts. I'm using my brand new headphones today, thanks to Jan's one-time offering. And if you don't want to do a support every month and you want to support the podcast, you can contact me on how to send an offering, and I will let you know through email or through the voicemail. I do this every week because of you. The feedback I get from you tells me this is worthwhile and we should keep going. I will keep going as long as you have me, and there are ample books to go through. There's also characters to look at individually. And speaking of characters, I would like to do another podcast about Frank. The last one I did is my second highest listened to podcast that I've ever done. And that was about the letters that he wrote to Reverend Wakefield. And I'm thinking I might pull from the novella that he's in with Roger's parents and kind of explore him more deeply there and what he's doing in the military. If there's anything that you would like me to explore about Frank, again, contact at adramaofoutlander.com, email, or 719-425-9444, and I will work on that. Because he's a really interesting character, and I don't think he gets his due. I think he's more the everyman, but he's not boring, and there's a lot to him, and he's very mysterious. I mean, he was a spy, essentially. Intelligence. MI6? That's a big deal. So he's not just a run-of-the-mill historian professor. There's so much depth to him. And I like exploring him in contrast to Jamie because we see so much of Jamie. But he's a really valuable character. And we actually see him throughout all the books here and there. So he doesn't just disappear with his death. He's much more meaningful than that. And I think giving him credit is important. It doesn't take away from Jamie to look at Frank realistically as a character. So thank you so much for listening. And until next time, Slán Java.